climate crisis is an economic crisis. Data for data's sake is actually worth nothing. Every dollar a company spends on reporting is a dollar that they're not spending on action.
Welcome to The Big Question, the series from Euronews addressing some of the most important topics in business, including how to uncover the environmental impact of some of the world's biggest companies. Today, I'm joined by Madera, CEO of CDP, a charity that helps to do just that. Thank you very much for joining us. So you work with some of the world's biggest companies like Apple, Microsoft and Walmart. Are they doing a good enough job of leading by example? You
mentioned Walmart. So Walmart, back in 2017, they launched the Gigaton project, which was planning to take 1 gigaton of carbon out of their emissions through their supply chain before 2030. In 2024, they have gotten there already.
Oh, wow.
So 6 years early. How they do that is look at the data from each of their suppliers and don't leave it at that, because data for data's sake is actually worth nothing. It is what action is being taken. So Walmart looking at that data and understanding what does that mean, how does that compare, how do other suppliers in that classification compare to them, and what can we do to be proactive and help those suppliers to actually decrease their carbon emissions. And that's something that's really impactful, because remember, 1 gigaton is 2.5 times the amount of emissions that the UK as a country emit every year.
For anyone who maybe isn't familiar with CDP, can you just explain exactly what it is that you do and why it's important?
CDP has been around for the last 24 years as being the world's global disclosure platform for climate and nature data. So we have 24,800 companies that report to us. That's over 2/3 of the world's market capitalization that report into CDP. So again, that data has all been accumulated over 24 years. We supply that data to investors. We have over 700 of the world's largest investors, representing $142 trillion worth of assets that are requesting this data through CDP.
So you mentioned that investors are often asking for this data. Is that quite a big benefit for a company in terms of they're declaring their data, and maybe is it making them more appealing to investors?
Yeah, increasingly I think that we're seeing that investors are including climate and nature and impact data in their decision making to allocate capital. But it's not just investors, right? We look at that as saying access to capital. So it might be public companies, private companies, even private equity are looking at this information. And that access to capital is important. But business efficiency and how your customer uses the data, how you use the data yourself in order to be able to meet your sustainability goals as a business, that business efficiency is also a driver. We've identified 21 different indicators that if a company is not looking at them and disclosing against them, it becomes far, far more difficult to believe that their target is credible and that their transition plan is credible. Sadly, the information there is that less than 1% of companies that disclose to CDP that they have a transition plan are credible transition plans. So there is a lot of work to be done there.
Thinking about all this data that you're collecting, what else is it showing us from an economic perspective?
So I think that it's showing us both risk and opportunity. You know, we're seeing sort of on the opportunity side, if we get this right, GDP should be increasing by 7% by 2030. There's also the downside if we get it wrong. You know, some of those quotes are a 20% decrease in GDP over the course of the next 20 years in various parts of the world. And again, you know, if we look at it from that point of view, we have to admit that actually the climate crisis is an economic crisis. However, I think what we are seeing is an encouraging number of companies increasing their transparency. And why I'm excited about that is some of the data from CDP has shown that once a company discloses to CDP, within 2 years, their emissions go down by 7 to 10%.
And on the 1st of January, the European Commission introduced the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive's new sustainability reporting regulations. Quite the mouthful.
Indeed.
What will this mean for companies in Europe?
Well, it's already meant a lot, Hannah. Companies have been preparing for mandatory disclosures, particularly in Europe, for a number of years. Certainly 2024 was a year of preparation. Of course, this has also sort of brought a lot of discussion about disclosure and about what is meaningful and how is it that this is going to be helpful to not only the companies but also the rest of the economy and perhaps the wider ecosystem. We need to make sure that we're really driving interoperability. let's try and make it as easy as possible, because every dollar a company spends on reporting is a dollar that they're not spending on action. And all of this mandatory disclosure we're talking about, the regulation there is very welcome, but actually until action is taken, it's again just a pot of data.
And so for those companies that maybe don't come under the new regulations, how do we incentivize their declarations? You know, is the cost to benefit ratio right for them at the moment?
Surfacing information about climate and nature, it has to be a benefit to the company itself.
Yeah.
Around the boardroom table, we need to have a seat available for climate and nature around that table.
Yeah.
Because those are not only the risks that company is facing, but there are huge opportunities as well. So in Europe alone, we identified in 2023 through the CDP disclosures, $3.47 trillion worth of opportunity that comes from making changes in order to lean into a sustainable future. And you might say, well, that's all great, but what would those opportunities cost for the same companies to be able to fulfill them? Well, Hannah, I'm pleased to say it's only $620 billion in relation to that 3.47 trillion.
When you say, you know, this 3.47 trillion euro worth of opportunity, what do you mean? What does this look like in the real world?
So depending on what type of business a company is, they would be looking at an R&D opportunity to change the product or the offering that they put into the marketplace in order to be more sustainable.
Yeah.
It could be packaging. It could be the fundamental product itself. It could be a delivery mechanism. So all of these changes are being looked at so that companies can make those decisions to take steps towards a more sustainable future. And I think that this is where some of the discussion around targets can come in.
Finally, we're at the start of a new Trump presidency, and you know there is some speculation that he might dismantle the ESG-related regulations during this time. Do you have any concerns around this?
Our largest country that discloses data is the US. And it's really encouraging to see companies that are making choices independent of who is in the White House.
Okay.
However, there will be headwinds in this, certainly. We saw that in the first Trump presidency. And again, CDP has weathered through that and increased the data year on year. So it says to me that 86% of the S&P 500 that already disclosed to CDP and has been maintained year on year are looking at data disclosure as a business advantage.
Thank you very much for your time today and for joining me on The Big Question.
Thanks so much, Hannah. I appreciate it.